Hi, I'm the PC expert amateur, and we're going to look at connecting ARGB and RGB fans. Now, when I say ARGB and RGB, I do not mean the fans that have one cable coming out of them with everything being powered by that one cable. So that could be a standard 2, 3, or 4 pin connector, but it powers the lights as well as the fan. It could also be other types of connectors. Now, if you have got standard ARGB, that's one thing. And I'll show you what standard ARGB and RGB connectors look like. I've got a PcCooler FX120 ARGB fan here. And the connectors should look like this. Okay, that's ARGB, true ARGB for most motherboards. Now, as I understand it, some motherboards have a slightly different setup for their proprietary system. And you know what? I don't care about those companies because they're dumb for locking themselves out of other kinds of options. You should be using standard, okay? If it's not a good standard, then get together with the rest of the industry and say, hey, let's define a new standard. Like, for example, I don't actually like the pinouts, or the pins, I should say, for the standards of RGB and ARGB because they're too easily damaged. Choose something better. Like SMJSTs, the 3 pins and the 4 pins. That's much better. So that is ARGB, and now let me show you RGB. And RGB will look like this. It has 4 holes. Now, if you see the male side, it'll have 4 pins. There are no pins missing. The nice thing about ARGB is that you can't accidentally connect it the wrong way. You don't connect it to a 4-pin header. You connect it to a 4-1 header, or a 3-pin header is what I mean. It's got a missing pin in it, and you can't do it the wrong way because it's impossible. Okay, and you should not try to connect it to a 4-pin RGB header because it'll probably destroy your fan's lights. So those are the standards for ARGB and RGB. There are lots of other possible things that you may come across. For example, with Leon Lee, Fantex, and a few others, you will see a 3-pin SMJST, and that's annoying. But at least several different companies are using that 3-pin JST connector, and you can get adapters to go from that to the standard ARGB or RGB. With RGB, of course, it's not going to be a 3-pin SMJST. It's going to be a 4-pin SMJST. There are lots of other options, though. If we look at NZXT, NZXT has decided, well, I don't want to use what Leon Lee and all these other companies are going to use. I want to use something completely different. So they decided that they're going to be wise guys, and they're going to use a 4-pin JST that is different, like this. It's got a lock on it, and it's got a different shape, so you can't easily use it with the open standards. And so you have to use their proprietary hub, of one of them anyways. Now the problem is that a lot of these companies have switched from one proprietary connector to another proprietary connector, without consideration for how that's going to impact the customers. So you may find yourself having a hub that does not match a fan because of this tendency of these companies, such as Corsair. Corsair and NZXT and some of the other companies have invested in multiple options, and they're not compatible with each other. Gigabyte also. It's got version 1, it's got version 2. And for Corsair, they also use a 4-pin connector with a lock, but it's not the same as the one I just showed you for NZXT. And so if you wanted to connect this fan, which happens to be the SP 120 RGB Elite, to a device that didn't use the Corsair standard, you'd have to find or make an adapter. And that means if you want to make it, you have to know the pinouts. In the case of the NZXT, you'd have to be able to add a resistor into the connection so that you could convert it to standard ARGB or RGB. But wait, there's more. For example, AlphaCool decided to go with a 4-pin JST without a lock, but it has a slot for a tab. So, yeah, that's fun. And then I've got this Delta that has a 5-pin connector with a lock. And it only uses 4 of the connectors, or 4 of the pins. So I need to find a source. I'm assuming this is some kind of PWM setup, but I don't actually know for sure. So that's another possibility that you're going to run into. Or if you are looking at Asia Horse, like the Magic C fans that they no longer seem to make, apparently, you'll find that there's not 2 cables coming out of it. There's 1. And it has a 6-pin JST on the end of it. So unless you have a hub that matches that 6-pin JST, you're going to be forced to use their proprietary hub. Now, does that mean that other hubs won't work that are 6-pin? Well, it just depends on how they've wired it. Have they wired it following some sort of standard, or did they wire it in a different way so that it's difficult for people to connect it to other companies' devices? And this doesn't just apply to fans. It applies to anything that has LEDs in it, and sometimes even, like I showed you with the Delta and the Asia Horse, it can also affect the fan control itself. Hooray. Isn't that wonderful that all these companies can't just agree to use one durable standard? Don't ask me why, other than some of these companies think that their standard is better, which may be true, or they are trying to capture more of the market. They think that they're going to trap people into their ecosystem of technology by using proprietary connectors. Well, people are just going to figure out how to make their own. Companies are going to make adapters. So ultimately, this effort is discouraging some customers from buying from these manufacturers because they use one connector, and then a few years later, they switch to a different connector and stuff like that. So let's talk about the ARGB and RGB standards. If you want to connect these, now there are obviously different options that you can use. One option is to get yourself a standard hub that has support for both PWM fans as well as ARGB fans, or PWM fans and RGB fans. So this is ARGB. You can tell because it's got 3 pins and there's a space between these ones and this one. you can tell that that is PWM. But here's the weird thing about these 4-pin connectors. Some of the 4-pin connectors, instead of having the PWM connector with the slot so that it has that narrow tab, they have the slot wider. So it'll connect to a PWM header, but if you've got that wider design with a tab from that variation, which is used by Black Noise Noise Blocker and some other companies, then you won't be able to connect a PWM fan to it unless you shave off that one ridge to make it fit. So like Barrow has got that problem, for example, that's another company. So you could get this, and then this could be plugged into your motherboard. So it does come with some cables, so let's take a look at that. This was, I got this on sale for half off. It's a $20 connector from Micro Connectors. So as you can see on this side, you've got the 4-pin proprietary connector with the lock on it, which kind of reminds me of Corsairs. And we need to plug that in on this end. And this end is a standard PWM connector. But actually, this one that I plugged in only has 3 wires. Then you've got this one, which you can connect for either VDG, which I forget which company that is. I think it's Gigabyte. This kind of connector here, which is just a single wire, or you can use the standard ARGB. And on the other end, they've got this weird little 2-pin with a lock. And that goes there. So this provides support for the open standard and then the Gigabyte or whatever that one is, VDG. So that's, this has got to be connected to the motherboard, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And then you take your ARGB fan, and I've got a PcCooler FX120 ARGB. I'm going to connect it to this hub. I'm not going to light it up. I'm just showing you how to connect it. All right, so we've got 2 cables coming off of it. This one is the ARGB, and you can actually, with this one, you can actually daisy chain it, because you pull that off and there's a male, so that you can add another ARGB in daisy chain, because usually there are a lot of motherboards that if they have an ARGB header, there's only one. So it's very important that if you see that you've only got one ARGB header, then you have to buy fans that have the daisy chaining feature, or you have to use a hub. And there's only a certain number of fans that you can connect through daisy chaining before you reach the maximum. And then it has a separate one for PWM. And here is the daisy chaining for PWM as well. And that's also important if you're looking at a motherboard that only has 1 or maybe 2, well, in other words, not enough headers for the fan control. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our hub, and we're going to look for either one like this that's red, or we're going to look for one that has port 0 or port 1, and plug in the first fan to that particular port. And the reason for that is that particular port, red or fan 1 or fan 0, is the one that controls all the fans on that hub. Now, if you buy a fan controller, it might work differently. It might have individual control for all fans. So you just plug that one in, and then the second one will be plugged in here, the third one here, and you just go around and fill it up like that. And of course, you want to also get your ARGB going. So you're going to take your ARGB connector, and you're going to plug it in to the connector next to the PWM for the same fan. Please don't connect it to a different one, because that's just going to make it harder for you. And this is a little bit awkward with this particular hub because they did not design it carefully to consider how challenging it is to get the pins into these holes without difficulty. Now you can run light through there, but it's still going to be a pain. There we go. And that's all you have to do. Now, since I've got a light behind me over here, I can see through the case and help me to align the holes with the pins, and that definitely makes it a little bit easier. So you're going to connect all your fans that way. Now, I suggest you mount your fans first before you actually attach them to the hub, because connecting them to the hub, it doesn't work well unless you've already got the fans in the correct place, and then you've already threaded them through the hole to the back where the hub is hiding. You're going to run into trouble. Now, this particular hub is nice because it has magnets in it, so you can stick it to the back of your case somewhere. If your case has not got aluminum, if it's got metal, you can do that, and that way you'll have full control. Now, with this particular one, I don't know where it is. With this particular one, in order to power this hub, you need to have this connected to the SATA connection from your power supply, and that way it'll actually do what it's supposed to do. And this can be controlled through the cables here via your motherboard. So this part, let me get this sorted out. Man, I tell you, it's like an octopus. So these cables need to be connected to your motherboard, the PWM and the ARGB. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, if you look back there, you can see some white. And let me see if I can point that out for you with my handy dandy extendable screwdriver. So we can, that one there is your ARGB header. And the other one is your RGB header. Now, on this particular motherboard, I've got two more ARGB headers down below. So I can choose to connect them down there, where you can see the two white headers, or I can connect it up top, where I showed you already. It doesn't matter. And then for the for the fan connection, the PWM connection, there are multiple places you can connect. It depends on your motherboard, though. You have to look and see where your channel fan connectors are, your channel fan headers. Now, in a pinch, if you're not using a water cooler, so you don't have a pump, you don't have anything plugged into your pump header, you could potentially plug in some of your 3-pin or 4-pin PWM fans to your pump header. But basically, a lot of the time you're going to find headers here, here, up there, and down in this area. And you can actually see some right here. There are two there. I'm using one already there. And that's it for this particular motherboard. Every motherboard is different as to how many fan headers it's got. That's something you should pay attention to when you're buying your motherboard. You don't want to get one that doesn't have enough support for what you need. All right, so in order to connect the hub to this, remember you're going to have the hub behind the motherboard. So you are not going to be doing exactly what I'm doing. You're going to have it come running. Well, I'll do it the right way so you can see. All right. So I pulled it through from the back. Please pull carefully. And now we're going to take these two and we're going to connect them. Now this is going to be a lot easier doing it on the bottom than on the top. And you can choose a different hole if that's more convenient for you or less mess than for you. I'm not going to keep it in here because I'm not using this hub for this computer, which is for my niece. So match up that slot you see on the head of the plug there with the tab that you can see under the pins here. And it always helps to have a fan to give you the ability to see when your vision is blocked or the source of light is blocked. So you plug it in like that for the power control of the fan itself. And then you take this one and you connect it to one of these white ones over here. Make sure you match 2 and 1 so you're not trying to force it on the wrong way. And it's always a little bit awkward with this. Just feel it gently, get it matched up, and there you go. As they say in Australia, Bob's your uncle. So as you can see, I've got the ARGB connection for the hub. I've got the PWM connection for the hub. It's all ready to go. Now all I've got to do is plug the hub into SATA. All right, so here we go with the connection of the SATA. You could get a cable to run from here to your SATA if it's not nearby. I happen to have it set up this way right now, so it's very easy. You can see that's an L shape, and that's an L shape, so you want to match up the L shape so you don't break anything. And don't force it. Please do it gently, and it'll kind of fit into place. Sometimes you might find a SATA cable that has a lock, but generally speaking, SATA cables like this don't have a lock, but you may find one, like the ones I used in some of the other videos. And then you can just stick that wherever you need it to be so that the magnet is hopefully strong enough to hold on to the metal. Or not, in this case, there's just not enough slack for this. And that's all you got to do for ARGB. Now, I don't happen to have an RGB hub, unfortunately. So all I can do is say, basically it's going to be the same procedure. It may or may not have independent power from the fan, from the PSU or power supply. It really depends on what you buy. The fan controllers that control each fan independently are always going to be connected to the power supply. If you've got a hub or controller that you want to use, but it does not connect to the motherboard like this one does with these cables that I showed you, then what you'll need to do is make sure that it has a connection to the USB system, because if it doesn't have that, if there's no connection at all to the motherboard, the only way you'll be able to control that fan controller is through any dials and buttons on it and or a remote control that comes with it. Which means you cannot coordinate the effects from it with the effects that are happening because of software and BIOS and stuff. Okay, so for RGB, I have this Lamptron Nova RGB fan, and fan makers are really confusing because they'll put RGB on stuff that's actually RGB. They'll put RGB on stuff that's not RGB because you can't control the fans at all. So it can be very, very confusing. This fan is actually a RGB because you can tell that from the 4-pin connector here. Now this has also got a 3-pin connector for fan control. Plus, you can power it directly through the power supply if you want to go that route for controlling the or powering the fan, at which point it will run at full speed the whole time. So let's go ahead and see how to connect this one to the motherboard. Again, I showed you where the RGB connector is. This is going to be a little bit more awkward, unfortunately, just because of the positioning of the RGB header. The RGB header can also be used for RGB strips, but do not connect an ARGB strip to an RGB header. All right. Now here's where the hard part comes in. You're going to have to look at the, oh boy, this one doesn't even show it. Most of the time when you get these, it'll show which side has the ground. Now on this one you can tell because if you don't see like a little arrow on this side or on this side, then you have to look at the cable itself. Whichever has the wire that is marked with a different color, usually white, but sometimes other colors, especially if the cabling is white, that is the one that is ground. And then you're going to have to find out on the motherboard which side is ground as well. It may be on the motherboard, silk screen onto the motherboard. It may only be in the manual, so you have to look. I'm going to take a look and see if it's on my motherboard or this motherboard because I don't have the manual for it. Okay, so this should be oriented so that the cable with the wire with the white on it is to the left. So you can see that that white is there, I hope. You see that white on this side here? So you're gonna plug it in like this. And don't tug on it because it'll come out very easily, just like the ARGB ones. And so it's connected there, and then all you got to do is take this cable and connect it to a fan header. So I'll just show again. It's a 3-pin, but that's okay. It doesn't matter how many pins it has. The important thing is if you have got a 4-pin connector and a 3-pin header, you can't do it unless you remove the 4-pin plug and replace it with a 3-pin, which means it won't be PWM. Just like that. And that's all you need to do. Now again, I don't have this computer fully built, so I can't plug it in and let you see how the lights work, but there are lots of videos out there about that. So I hope that has answered all of your questions. This video was made because of the need of one of my viewers, BACK, who I believe is Russian or Ukrainian or something like that because they wrote in Russian. But it should help other people as well. If there are any questions or requests or anything like that, please make sure to leave me a comment. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.